What's up, boys? Tricks Ridiculous back with another video. So in this video I wanted to give kind of my final thoughts, my kind of closing thoughts, if you will, on Kate Bishop, kind of how to play her optimally, some of the different options you have, some of the different pieces of gear. I have played a lot of Kate. I've tried all of the different ways to build her, and I think I've kind of landed on a couple of different ways that are viable. So just wanted to kind of talk through that, talk through kind of what pieces of gear you really should be looking out for, what would be ideal for Kate, and kind of how you can farm those, and then just kind of my overall thoughts on the character in general. Before we get into that, be sure to like and subscribe if you haven't already. It really does help out the channel, and I greatly appreciate it. But without further ado, let's get right into it. All right, boys, so what you're looking at here, this is my scattershot Kate Bishop. I'll come right out and say it's not 100% perfect to a T, but I don't think anyone's character really is. There's still a few pieces that I'm still just trying to grind for, but I've just not been able to get the ideal pieces that I need. But I just wanted to kind of do this video just a little bit, free ball. I don't really have a script for this, just kind of talking through my thoughts for Kate out loud, and hopefully you guys will find it helpful. So, like I said, I've played Kate a number of different ways, and there's really, when it comes down to it, there's really only two ways to play her. There's the scattershot build, and then there's playing her as melee. Now, I'll admit the scattershot build is probably, actually I'll say it's definitely more powerful than the melee build, but it is a little more boring, I will say. It's pretty one note. You kind of just, if you've played Kate, and you've played scattershot, you know how it works. You literally just keep shooting your scattershot arrows. It's very straightforward. You really don't have to mix things up too much. Whereas if you're playing the melee build, you're a little more in the action, kind of a little bit of a higher skill ceiling. You kind of, it's a little more fun to play, if you will. But I think overall, you get a lot more value out of the actual scattershot build, and I think you're actually much more valuable to a team. I think Kate overall, if I could kind of categorize her as kind of a character class, she's definitely not, a pure DPS character. She's definitely not, a pure kind of support character or a tank character. She's really more of that kind of continuous damage, not so much burst damage, but continuous damage. And I would honestly call her more of a control character. She kind of, controls the flow of the battlefield, doesn't let anything kind of get too crazy, but at the same time still provides consistent, continuous damage. You're not going to see, I don't think you're going to see, any videos from anybody where Kate is doing, 2.5 million damage to Taskmaster or Abomination like you see with Hulk or Thor. But what you will see is, instances where Kate can just continuously fire arrows, every single arrow doing 60, 70,000 times 5 for scattershot, for a period of like 10 seconds. So it's continuous damage more so than it is burst damage. And then the other thing about it is the control aspect. Obviously with decoy, especially with singularity, really able to kind of provide support for the team, kind of control enemies on the battlefield. Really, singularity has been absolutely stellar. I've played, with a few games with some friends where, singularity, you compare it with so many things. You compare it with a Hulk clap. You do a singularity, get everyone in a spot, and then Hulk claps them all out of existence. Same thing with Bifrost. Same thing with even the Assault Heroics. You could do it with Thor's God Blast. You could do it with Hulk's, what's it called? The Steamroller, I think it's called, where you just run forward his Assault Heroic. Really powerful, especially in combination with other live players who are able to coordinate it with you. Absolutely fantastic. So without further ado, let me just kind of get into some of the gear for my scattershot build, what you really want to look out for. Now, on the melee build, on the melee piece here, I really don't have like there's no one piece that's absolutely perfect. Really, because we're playing a ranged build, you really just want a melee piece that provides precision, right? Because precision doesn't come too frequently on a melee build. What I've got here, we're not really worried about the first or second perks on that piece there. We're not really doing power attacks. That doesn't really matter. And then the Faultless Inspiration doesn't really matter, but it's got a good precision roll, a good proficiency roll, and then that third piece there, the Overcharged Flare, critical attack damage while overcharged 110%. That's very, very useful. Now that, when they say overcharged, that actually means when you fill up your intrinsic meter. That does not mean you're super. So it's when you actually fill the intrinsic meter, you get into that overcharged state. Gives you basically double damage, especially if you have your damage buff up. You'll be doing pretty much consistent crits, right? So really just a complete double of damage. So be sure to look out for that on your melee piece. It's really just a nice perk that helps your ranged damage from the melee slot. Other than that, there's really nothing else I would recommend. If you can really get like the dream piece here, this one here, the Hawkbird's Edge, this is a nice one to pick up. I'll show you in just a minute kind of what I'm still looking to grind for, but like I said in my previous videos, Kate doesn't really utilize the battery effect very well. She doesn't really have anything in her kit that can, apply damage intrinsically. What I mean by that is like, you know how like, Widow can apply a lot of shock very easily, or Thor can, do a lot of shock, or can do ice or fire or whatever. Kate doesn't really have an ability that can kind of prime an enemy with an element for you to then counter it with another element. But she does have this piece here, and this is quite good. You'll notice really the first perk on that is really what we're looking for, the Quantum Effector. Quantum teleportation intrinsic attacks deal status effect damage based on what type of melee status gear is equipped. So whatever element you have in that second slot, so for me, you'll see it's Gamma, your teleport attacks, and that's these attacks over here. So it's the ones where you hold R2 and then you go square, 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 or you can go just triangle. These will actually they'll apply whatever element you have in that second slot. And it actually, from what I've tested with this piece, it really does apply pretty strongly. It is quite a lot. So you can use this if you can kind of pair this with a different element in your number 2 slot. You can actually get that battery effect. I wouldn't recommend it for every single enemy. I might even just kind of keep like a high precision kind of overcharged piece for like pretty much all of your normal combat, and then maybe just quickly swap to this melee piece right before the boss fight. That's really where I would go with that one. Because bringing yourself over to your ranged piece here, now this is the most important piece in the build, obviously, right? And there's a couple of different ways you can go about getting this piece going. Excuse me, sorry, it was showing the actual wrong piece there. It does that sometimes, but this is the one I'm using, Targeted Buff Arrowheads. So you'll notice, obviously, the prefix perk there, Targeted Buff. That gives you the 28, in my case it's 28.7, can be up to like 30 and change. Chance of hitting an enemy with a ranged crit attack grants a damage buff. So this is crucial. I'll say it again. It's the most important thing you can get on Kate. You'll notice mine, in this particular case, the number 2 piece and the number 2 perk and the number 3 perk are like basically irrelevant. They don't actually matter. I don't even use them. I don't use explosive arrows. In my opinion, explosive arrows, I've tried them a number of different ways. They really are just too clunky for everyday fighting. They're just not worth using. This is the piece I am still grinding for the perfect roll here. But you gotta have the target buff, and then ideally you want an element on the second piece. If I were to hand cherry pick the element, I would say Cosmic would be a really good one. Shock would also be really good. But again, if you have a piece like this, the Hawkbird's Edge, honestly, a good piece is just whatever counters that. Whatever is going to give you kind of the opposite of that, that's what you really want to look for. But again, we're really only using the Hawkbird's Edge for single target damage, boss DPS. So for kind of everyday enemies, if you're only going to apply one element, Shock and Cosmic, those are both very good ones to be able to apply. Now, if you absolutely don't have this piece, or you really want to, use something similar, but you'll notice a piece here, Adept Buff Arrowheads. Now, this one's a little bit different, but can still work. You'll see 20% chance weak point attacks grant a damage buff. Now, when you're using the Scatter Arrow, every single one of those 5 arrows kind of can proc independently of each other. So if you're right in an enemy's face and you just shotgun them with a scatter shot and all 5 shots hit them in the head for that weak point hit, each one of them is going to trigger this chance of getting a damage buff. In my testing, this one is a little bit less consistent than the targeted buff. It's much easier, especially when you're shooting 5 arrows a draw. It's much easier to just get a crit randomly on an enemy to get this buff going than it is to get that weak point attack. But it's not impossible. The Adept buff can work too, and you'll notice this piece I have also gives shock damage. So this piece is okay. The stats on it are a little bad. It's a drop in precision. But it's still perfectly acceptable if this is all you have. For me, right now, the targeted buff is still the best piece I have for DPS. So it's still what I'm using, what I'm really grinding for, and kind of what the dream piece would be. For me would be, obviously good stats, pretty much the stats you're looking at here. You want precision and then a little defense. You want targeted buff. You want scattershot arrows give, Cosmic would be ideal, or, Shock would be good. I would also I'd really settle for anything at this point in that number 2 slot. And then for the third piece, if you're just going for the absolute dream, you could get ranged kills with a ranged crit, give something like a defense buff. So something like this one here. I think I kept this just for demonstration. That bottom perk there, it's a high % chance, right? Because it's defeating an enemy. But once you have that damage buff, pretty much all of your hits are going to be crits anyway. So then you get a high chance when killing an enemy with a ranged crit to grant a defense buff. You could also have, to grant a heroic charge burst. That's good as well. Just something to get, some value out of that third piece. And that third perk there, the chance of defeating with a ranged crit, that can drop on any epic or legendary. So the absolute dream would be all 3 of those. Would be targeted buff, an element on scatter shot, and then chance on ranged crit kill to grant some type of effect. That's the dream. I wouldn't really go with anything like I think there's an exotic for Kate that gives plus 20% to scatter shot damage. I would highly advise against that one. There are other ways to get a damage buff, but in my opinion, just the way Kate plays, like I said, because she shoots 5 arrows at a time, every single one of them can trigger independently. In my testing, I do not see a more consistent way to keep up a damage buff than targeted buff. It's the best way for Kate, and it allows you to kind of use other gear, which you'll see in just a second, for other purposes. So you don't need to use like a heroic piece that has kill 3 enemies or that has, something else. So this, to me, is the creme de la creme. It's the best piece you can get for Kate in the 2 slot. Coming over to the body piece. Now, the body piece is usually a very flexible piece, right? There's really not too many body pieces that are like mandatory for any particular build. There is, as you all probably know, the Hawkette's bodysuit. I did showcase this in my previous build. This is a fantastic piece. It's a very unique piece, and honestly, I love that they're bringing more unique pieces like this into the game. For me, I don't use this anymore on my Kate Bishop. The reason being, as you know, it puts you into that kind of your super, right? It puts you into your ultimate for a period of 4 seconds. And with that, you get the attack from the ultimate. So you get the, whether you're using kind of that machine gun ultimate, which we'll get to in just a sec, or you're using just the regular, charge up arrows, or you're using the sword. I don't like going into that every time I blink. I would rather keep my scatter shot arrows at all times. So that's why I don't like this piece. In fact, you'll see when I get to the build here and kind of the skills, I don't actually even like going into my ultimate at all. I think Kate's ultimate is very, very bad, actually, unless you're playing melee. This piece, hands down the best for a melee Kate build, absolutely turns you into a superstar, but for ranged, I would not go with this piece. What I do actually go with is, again, just a random roll legendary. You could see this one's got some decent stats. It's got precision. And then what I'm actually using here is a defense buff. Now, defense buff is actually probably right now one of the most underrated perks in the game. A lot of people, always looking for damage buff, which is understandable. Damage buff is like the best perk in the game. Every character, in my opinion, you should try to make sure you find a way to consistently keep up a damage buff. But I think people are going to start to see the value in the defense buff as well. Now, the defense buff actually gives you 60% increased defense. That's a lot of defense, okay? Now, I like to use a reactive protection for Kate. Obviously, it's kind of intuitive, right? When you take damage, that's when you get a chance to get a defense buff. That's when you need it, right? Because now you're a little bit lower in health. I've seen, other characters, you can get kind of when you take damage, you get a damage buff. That's obviously a very popular piece on a character like a Hulk or a Captain America, someone who's taunting enemies, right? For Kate, I don't think that's really necessary. You'll see my Kate, not very tanky, but the defense buff does absolute wonders. It's absolutely fantastic. And honestly, it counts on any type of damage taken, right? So when you take damage, it could be from the little lasers that just put that little consistent damage that does basically nothing to you. Anytime you take any type of damage, you got a 30% chance plus whatever your proficiency is, right? So in my case, it's about 20%. So you're looking at basically a 50% chance when taking damage to get that defense buff. And then you're basically immune, right? You're taking 60% mitigated damage, on top of whatever other defense, you already have on the character. It's very, very good. Now, like I said, this is the one piece of gear I think that is really the most flexible, right? If you don't have this exact piece, that's totally fine. Honestly, I was just using, prior to getting that piece, I think this was what I was using. Literally every single one of the perks on this chest piece mean absolutely nothing. They do absolutely nothing for me, but it had good stats, right? So I was using it as a bit of a stat stick. That's totally acceptable as well. If you get a piece that just has like a tremendous amount of precision and, resolve, that would be great. That would be ideal. But for me, if you can get that defense buff, it's going to pull its weight way more than the stats. And then coming over to the actual heroic gear here. Now, there's a couple of different things you can do here. I love the Archer's Charm. If you don't already have this piece, go out and get it. It is absolutely crucial that every Kate Bishop have this piece. I'm not even joking. It's going to be absolutely essential to at least have this piece available to you when we get the cloning labs, when we get the Super Adaptoid fight, when we get the raids. This perk here, Disruptor Extension, right now, I think is the best perk in the game, period. It's absolutely fantastic, and there's nothing quite like it. So if you don't already know, this works with the Disruption Arrow, which is this one. So it's basically your Razor Arrow, but you hold it down until it does a little purple flash. You can't miss it. It's very easy. And then when you hit an enemy with it, you'll notice they get a little red kind of marker over their head. And if you just read the description here, they get a debuff, which lasts for 6 seconds and increases ranged crit attack chance from any source by 25%, all right? So any source, now that's obviously you, and any other ranged source. So if you have a Widow on your team that just has like blazing guns, if you have, an Iron Man who's shooting rockets, whatever, any ranged attack, they're getting a 25% increased crit chance. That's huge. They're going to be hitting crits nonstop. Now, what really brings this to the next level is when you use Disruption Extender, using that disruption effect, it increases by 3 seconds, right? So it brings it from 6 seconds to 9 seconds, which is a 50% boost. That's huge. And then it reduces enemy defense by 30%. That is absolutely insane. Now, that is completely separate from the actual ranged crit, right? That will also apply to melee attacks. So not only are you increasing the crit chance on the enemy by 35% for ranged, but every single attack that hits that enemy is basically going to be doing a 30% bonus damage for 9 seconds. All right, that is absolutely phenomenal, and there's nothing in the game currently like that we have. So it's my honest belief that a Kate Bishop, when the raids come out, when we're fighting, Omega level threat bosses, you're gonna want a Kate Bishop on the team in some form or fashion, if not just for specifically this build, or for specifically this perk. It is absolutely crucial for boss DPS. And, even just, playing solo, doing villain sectors, doing whatever, even just, when you come across a tough enemy, sometimes you come across a Dreadbot, you come across a really shielded Exo, hit him with the quick disruptor arrow and you will melt that guy like butter. I promise you, it's absolutely insane. Not only that, but this piece comes with an extra charge of Warp Arrow, which is incredible. Now, we already know we're going to be using Singularity. I don't need to tell you guys that. And then it increases the charge rate of the heroic support by 16.5. Not bad. It's pretty helpful, right? That's not a bad perk. Now, this is, in my opinion, I use this for all content. Even if I'm not doing, boss runs, so to speak, even if I'm just running through hives, running through whatever, I'll still use this. I think the extra warp charge arrow is absolutely worth it for just like mobbing and all types of content. And then even if I only use that disruption extender on 1 or 2, maybe I'll use it on an Adaptoid or, like I said, like an Exo or a Dreadbot once in a while. It's still, to me, it's still worth it. Now, what you can also use, you could be pretty flexible here. I actually used to use this piece right here, this Dauntless Quake Charm, prior to getting this piece here. And the reason I did that was for this defense buff. Now, it has precision, right? Now, you'll notice this Archer's Charm doesn't have precision on it. It can't roll with precision. It's a named piece. So this is how you're getting it every time. But still worth it for that buff. But if you don't really like that for everyday content, you can get a piece that has high precision. And then some things you'll want to look out for, obviously chance on defeating enemies to get some sort of buff, whether that's a damage buff, whether it's a defense buff. In my testing, I don't think an extra damage buff is necessary. You'll notice really the only thing I have that can give me a damage buff is ranged crit, and it's more than enough. I always have damage buff up. So you don't need damage buff elsewhere. That's what I said earlier. That's why I wouldn't recommend anything but target buff in this slot, because you can, very easily allocate other slots. For example, I don't need a damage buff on killing 3 enemies. I don't need a damage buff on killing 1 enemy. I can use the Archer's Charm because I can still consistently get both a damage and a defense buff from my chest piece. So I'm in a really good spot there. But if you don't have that, a chance on defeating enemies to grant a defense buff, a chance, to get a heroic charge burst. Those are always good. Berserker is a very, very good prefix on a perk on the charm for Kate Bishop. So you'll see this one has Berserker Protection. Berserker is the one when it's land 16 hits in rapid succession without taking damage to grant a defense buff. This, for Kate, again, with Scattershot, each of those hits counts as 5 hits. So it really can add up to 16 very, very quickly. If you're hitting, as long as you're hitting maybe a large target or just a group of enemies, you can really, within 4 shots of an arrow, you can get that 16 hit, no problem. And it's really easy for Kate, especially if you throw down a decoy to not take damage. So really, really powerful to get a nice Berserker piece there. Other than that, I wouldn't recommend too many pieces here. I've tried this piece. I got this piece, and this is obviously Jarvis Barrier pieces are a little bit of unicorns to get a good one. I got one here that basically gives 7% on defeats to grant a Jarvis Barrier, along with that Berserker Spark for a heroic charge burst. This piece is okay. I've found that 7.2% chance is very, very low, and even with a high proficiency, it really doesn't proc enough to be useful. If you have like an absolute unicorn piece, like a Jarvis Barrier on ranged crit, that could be like the only piece I would recommend over a targeted buff, because Jarvis Barrier is absolutely insane, and not even for the actual damage that it prevents, but when you have your Jarvis Barrier, it stops you from any type of stagger. So if someone damages your barrier but doesn't get to your health, you're not going to be flinched at all. So you can just keep shooting. The other thing that it works really well with is any type of Berserker buff. So if you have like a Jarvis buff on ranged crit, Jarvis Barrier on ranged crit, you could probably keep a Jarvis Barrier up at all times, and then you could pair that with something like a Berserker buff where 16 hits grant you a damage buff, and you can get your damage buff that way. That would be really nice, because the Jarvis, when they're dealing damage to the Jarvis Barrier, it does not interrupt your 16 hits in rapid succession. It'll only interrupt it if you take health damage. So just a little thing to think about. So I apologize, I was a little bit off on a tangent there, but you have some options in the in the charm department, but I strongly recommend picking up an Archer's Charm, even if you don't use it, all the time. Pick it up, just so you'll have it available if you need to swap to it, in a raid or whatever the case may be. Right now, it's the best support piece for single target damage, so I highly, highly predict that this will be used very extensively in high-end content. Other than that, that's pretty much it for the gear. Coming over to the minor artifacts, obviously double blue is what you want. Now, I got a little lucky here. You'll notice I have the exact identical piece. And this, I'm not cheating, this is actually a piece that the vendor, Sydney Levine, in the Shield substation was selling. If you don't know, those vendors are actually on a rotation. They will eventually if they sell a piece, they'll eventually sell a piece, with the exact same perks again down the line. So he had sold one of these, pretty early on when Kate came out, and you'll see here it's got Heroic Assault, 18% increased charge rate with, obviously great precision. The signature stun damage, not super relevant, but with that heroic ability charge, that's our Warpole Singularity Arrow. That's absolutely fantastic. So I've got two of those exact pieces. So I've got a major increased charge rate of my Assault Heroic. So definitely keep an eye out on these, especially pairing with the extra charge of the Warp Arrow. It's a no-brainer. It's absolutely fantastic. You'll have your Warp Arrow up very, very frequently. And then for the major artifact, now I'm going right now with the Nornstone of Lethal Will. It's really close between that and the Ring of Nebulung. You'll notice here I actually leveled this up just because I assumed it would be the best with Kate, but after some extensive playing, I think I'm sold on the Nornstone. The reason being the damage buff is just too valuable. The actual Ring of Nebulung, it's nice, but it's nice really for the Warp Arrow more than anything. The decoy, we don't really care too much about it. We throw it out there just as a nice to have, but it's not really an integral part of our kit. And then, like I said earlier, I actually think that the ultimate for Kate Bishop is bad. I actually don't want to use it. I never actually try to use it. When we go through the skill trees, I'll kind of explain my reasoning. But because of that, we're really only caring about 1 out of 3 of our heroic abilities. I don't really see the need for the Ring of Nebulung specifically on Kate. So with that said, Sacred Nornstone, extend that damage buff by 4 seconds. And again, if you don't know, this specifically applies to the actual damage buff that's called damage buff. It doesn't apply to any type of, Thor's support or any type of other, random things that give you a bonus to damage. It literally applies to damage buff. All right. So I would strongly recommend this. Tactagon, you don't need, like I said, Kate doesn't really use elements too often, so not really good there. Darkhold, no real interest in that. No real interest in the Sacred Nordstone of defense, and then no real use for invisibility, so no worries there. So that's really it for the gear. So I'll just take you through the skills and kind of how I have the skills laid out, and then we'll just kind of wrap up with some closing thoughts. All right, boys, so here we are with the skill tree for Kate Bishop. So this is how I have my specialty tree laid out. Here's how I have my mastery tree laid out. I'm not really going to go through the mastery tree too much, so feel free to take a screenshot if you want to just copy what I'm using. But I think the mastery tree really builds itself. If you, obviously, you have ranged options and you have melee options. So if you're playing melee, pick the melee perks. If you're playing range, pick the range perks, right? It's pretty straightforward. But the specialty is where it really can be tweaked quite a bit. Now, I've played around with a lot of these in all different ways, and this is just how I have Kate built. If you happen to have gear that rolls a different way, maybe you have, you have higher valor than I do, you'll notice that my heroic rating is very, very low. I actually have no valor. I don't really put too much stock into the heroic abilities doing damage. So because of that, I've actually picked basically all of these support type options, all right? So you'll see here for the decoy, I'm actually using Afterglow. So triggering After Image regenerates willpower and intrinsic energy. So basically, if you take a big hunk of damage, you need to kind of get some health back, you can kind of panic pop your support heroic. We're really not looking for this to do much damage because, like I said, we're running really no valor. It's not going to do a lot of damage anyway, so we really just use it for more of a defensive kind of decoy piece. And then because of that, I'm using Healing Light, so it's got a chance to generate some regen packs as it deals damage. If you have higher valor, I would recommend, Probability Matrix for the extra damage, and then Cover Fire for kind of, again, extra total damage against each enemy. The combination of these two middle pieces here is your maximum. It's really the most damage you can get out of the After Image. But truthfully, unless you're running a very high heroic, high valor build, you're not going to get that much damage out of it anyway. I would strongly advise against Quantum Field, the Shadowjack ability. It's really not that good. It lasts for 3 seconds. It's gone before you even know it. It's really not worth it. And then this one here, Photon Surge. So I actually, speaking of playing around with Kate, I actually did have a build way back when that basically was a pure Valor build. I had double Valor. I had, all Valor all through my pieces, and I was trying to see how I could really make my Assault Heroic and Support Heroic kind of the star of the show. And what I had kind of tried was this was the move. You kind of pop the After Image, right? You then pop a Singularity kind of right on top of it, and then you detonate the decoy. You detonate it to self-destruct after everyone's been sucked on it, so that you can kind of, you do it pretty much immediately so that you get back most of the support heroic energy, and then, you have multiple charges of your war power. So you can do it again and again. I did that with something like 3,000 heroic rating on Kate, and it still did absolutely nothing. It did, honestly, even with damage buff, it did probably about 50,000 to every enemy. I think the explosion did about 50,000. And then they'd already exploded, so then you didn't even get the explosion from the Singularity to actually hit them. Because they were already gone. So really, in my opinion, the Kate's heroics are very good, specifically the Assault Heroic, but I wouldn't use them for damage. I've tried the High Valor. In my opinion, it just isn't the way to play Kate. You're much better off. You're going to get a lot more bang for your buck with pure precision, and having a high ranged rating, and just spraying those scattershot arrows, and then just using your support abilities to assist the team. So that's that. For the Assault Heroic, I shouldn't have to tell you guys this one. It's Singularity with an extra charge. The rest of these are all kind of garbage, honestly. If I've tried Jumper again with the actual, high heroic, and you'd be surprised you can actually get, when you're using the warp arrow as, the default way to play it, where you teleport and then do an explosion, it actually does pretty respectable damage. So there might be a build somewhere where, again, you're playing high valor and you just go triple charge on this, right? And it'll actually be quadruple charge if you use the Archer's Charm here. It'll be quadruple charge of that. So, that's a possibility, but to me, missing out on that Singularity is just too much to give up. I think Singularity is just the absolute best thing on Kate. I just wouldn't trade this perk for anything else in the kit. And I think it's going to become even more valuable when we get real endgame content that requires co-op play with other live players. Like I said, you compare this with a Hulk Clap, a Thor Bifrost, a Thor Odin, a Thor God Blast, or even a Hulk Steamroller, or an Iron. You can do an Iron Man Omega Beam and have a bunch of heroic orbs spawn. There's a lot of different things you can pair this with when you've got players, to communicate with and coordinate an attack with. Singularity, I'm probably never unequipping this piece going forward. And then coming over to the actual ultimate ability here. So I'm using Quantum Pulse. Now you might look at this one and think, well, why the hell are you using this? And honestly, I really don't use it. I don't really care for the damage that the blink does. It really isn't a lot of damage. And I don't really care to even, like I said, be in my super at all, because I don't really want to be Kate to be shooting these arrows, right? She shoots these quantum arrows or charged quantum arrows. To me, when I'm in this ultimate for 30 seconds, that's 30 seconds that I could have been shooting scatter arrows and doing way more damage. So I try not to ever really activate the ult. But when I do, it can be usually because of this. So I'll use Quantum Flux. Defeating enemies with Overdrive grants immediate boost to willpower and regenerates additional willpower over time. So again, kind of like a panic button, similar to this Afterglow. If you suddenly take a big hit and you're at almost no health, you pop your ultimate, you stay in it for 30 seconds, you kill a guy or two, you regenerate your health, and then you go back to business as usual. That's the way I like to use it. So again, if you have higher heroic rating than me, maybe you have similar gear, but you just happen to roll a little more valor, feel free to swap these out. If you don't think you need the defense, go for more damage. Go for damage on the after image. Go for, something here. The Quantum Sight is obviously great for melee, but if you're not using melee, I would not recommend it. And then this Quantum Storm, I would strongly advise against this in all circumstances. I think this thing is crap. It's really, really, really bad. It doesn't do hardly anything. The actual explosion you get from overcharging someone, you can only do it 3 times on a single target. So if you're just laying out on a boss, let's say on an Abomination, he's going to do an explosion 3 times. He's going to take a little bit of damage. But then you're just going to, for the rest of the 25 seconds that you're doing this, you're going to be just firing away and just doing minuscule pecks of damage. So I strongly advise against this one. But anyway, that's pretty much it. I guess I don't really have much more to show you guys on the tree. This is how I've built my Kate. And this, honestly, after a lot of testing of all the different kinds of ways you can play her, I've landed on Scattershot as the absolute best. Melee being also good, but still not, the tops, but probably more fun. Everything else, we'll have to wait and see if they provide some buffs or nerfs. I don't anticipate any of that coming anytime soon, but I've tried, just using Razor Arrow. I've tried using just Explosive Arrow. It doesn't work. I mean, if maybe you're on mouse and keyboard and you just have an aimbot or something, maybe the Razor Arrow will work for you, but I still think you're losing out damage by not using the scatter shot. And then the explosive arrow is just too clunky. It's so clunky, it's ridiculous. I've also tried doing like a high stun build with the smoke bomb. It's okay. It's just not good enough. It's just not like something you want to be doing when you could just be continuously blasting out that kind of shotgun spread. It really covers all bases. It does extremely good damage close range, and it does can even kill enemies from a mid-range. The only thing it really can't do is extremely long range, right? That's what you have the Razor Arrow for. But even then, you're not doing anything consistently. You might switch to Razor Arrow once to take out a turret, that's super far away, but then you're just going to switch right back to the Scattershot Arrow for pretty much all other enemies. So, overall thoughts on Kate. Fantastic character, really, really fun to play, really, really powerful. Admittedly, a little bit boring. When you're really playing her optimally, in my opinion, and you're just continuously letting loose scattershot arrows, keeping your damage buff up, keeping your defense buff up, you're going to be mowing down enemies, consistently. I mean, you can just walk while aiming down sights and just mow through tons and tons of enemies. But it gets a little boring. After you do 14 layers of a hive like that, you're kind of like, all right, maybe let me switch to another character. So there's definitely pros and cons to Kate, but overall, I think a fantastic character, really provides a unique support that we don't currently have, especially with that Singularity Arrow, and with the Disruptor Arrow. So really with both of these, with that Warp Arrow, with the, pulling all the enemies in, really, really helpful to a team. And also that Disruption Extender, again, extremely, extremely helpful for single target DPS, single target boss damage, or even just large enemies in general. Absolutely fantastic. I see Kate being an absolute staple on many teams. When the raid, again, we don't know exactly what the raid entails, or what the Clone Labs or I think we have an idea of what the Omega level threat boss fight is. I imagine we're going to be fighting Super Adeptoid again, right? But in any type of, raid or, Omega level mission, whatever, they're all going to have some point where you have to fight a boss, right? You have to fight some type of harsh enemy. And having this Disruptor Arrow, I think, is going to be a staple in team builds moving forward. So I'm going to keep playing Kate. Probably going to go back and, polish off some other characters. But, let me know what you guys think. Let me know, what's your kind of final thoughts, if you will, on Kate? Or maybe you're still leveling Kate, and hopefully this video has helped you to kind of keep a lookout on some gear that you might need. But definitely I see myself playing Kate in raids. When it comes out, I'll be streaming a lot more, doing some raids with viewers, things like that. Really excited for that time of the game when we eventually get to that point. But that's pretty much it for me. Like I said, just wanted to kind of do a kind of brain dump on Kate Bishop for you guys. I didn't really write a script for this. I didn't have like a structured video to do this through, but just kind of wanted to give my overall thoughts, because I have played a lot of Kate. I have tried every single which way to play her. And in my opinion, this is the best. So if you trust my opinion, I guess you have no reason to trust me, but if you do, play Scattershot, play it this way, kind of look for the pieces that I've been going through, and you will have an absolute monster. But that's it for me. Be sure, again, to like, comment, subscribe, all that good stuff, and follow me on Twitch as well. I'll definitely be streaming a bit more, once the Clone Labs come out, once we've got a real endgame content that requires multiplayer play, I will want to be playing a lot more with viewers and doing streams of that nature. So follow me on Twitch as well. Join my Discord, follow me on Twitter, all that good stuff. That's it for me, guys. Hope you enjoyed, and I'll see you in the next one.